Good evening, Avacal, and thank you again for joining us on part 2 of our Ask the Peers series Laurel edition. I am Mistren Adelheid, and tonight we'll be answering the remainder of the questions presented to the Laurels on Facebook. Thank you again for all of your questions. Again, we would like to begin by acknowledging that Avacal is in Treaty 4, 6, 7, 8, 10, and 11 territories, the Métis Nation, and the Nunavut settlement area. We acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps marked these lands for centuries. The Order of the Laurel is thankful to Baron Fial Loderson, who has agreed again to be our moderator for tonight's panel. And with that, I turn it over to you, Fial.
Thank you very much. It is nice to be here for part 2. Seems like forever since we were all together. I'm going to introduce the panelists. I'm Baron Fial, Master of the Order of the Pelican, member of the Order of the Pelican. We have Maitre Philippe de Saint-Denis. We have Mistress Dorothy. We have Katerina Koch. We have Francesco Moretti, and we have Sav. Same panelists as last night, same great answers, and I'm looking forward to listening to you all again. So with that, we will get into the questions. The first one: how do the Laurels see and/or address cultural appreciation versus appropriation? I like this one. And the first one to answer will be Katerina.
Hello. So, cultural appreciation versus appropriation, especially with the Laurel, this is something that's important because we are trying to study often cultures that we don't belong to. So cultural appropriation is when we're taking a culture that's not ours and portraying it in a demeaning way. So we're talking jokes, characters, infantilization, sexualization of that culture. Cultural appreciation is where we're learning about the culture and doing our best to represent it, often with the help of people from that culture. I portray my own culture, which is an immigrant culture, that being Ukrainian, within the SCA. And I know that often when our cultural community has had people come from outside, when they initially come in, they often stumble, and they often stumble quite badly. The only way that you can really deal with that situation often is to help educate them, make sure that they have access to the resources so that they won't stumble about that culture afterwards. So within the SCA context, what we end up having to do is when you see someone that might be doing something that you think is cultural appropriation, it's sometimes worth asking them and finding out what they've researched and where they're coming from, like in a very conversational way, if you can. So if you still think they're stumbling on what they're doing, after you've talked to them about their research, you want to be providing them with information as Laurels. And then if you've got someone who's still clearly blundering and doesn't seem to give a damn, this starts to fall into something a little bit more serious, and maybe that's when we start looking at a different procedure, which is our grievance procedure. Hopefully we never ever get to that spot. The other thing that's worth noting is that when we're talking about cultural appreciation, if I'm dealing with the Ukrainian culture and the Ukrainian cultural community, oftentimes that's not the same information and the same cultural norms as the medieval Ukrainian community. So because those two norms are very different often, you end up with a situation where what you might do might offend the modern cultural community of the time, because they currently don't see themselves that way. It really does behoove you to work with the cultural community if you can in that context. And hopefully as Laurels, we are able to help and mediate that. And hopefully we're also, if you've got questions and you don't want to approach somebody because you think you're going to offend them, oftentimes the Laurels actually are aware of the people who are crossing cultures, and we can help to mediate. If you come and talk to us, we can hopefully help you in that respect. And I think that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much. That was well said. Philippe.
Good evening, Avacal. Nice to see you again. So I'm going to speak on this issue as someone who has reenacted a persona from India, a person of color in the past. Prior to enacting Philippe, I was Rajpal Ganeshan, who was a male Hindu incense merchant living in Rajasthan, Hindustan, at the end of the 1500s. My response is going to echo some of what Mistress Katerina just said, as well as what Mistress Dorothy said yesterday, in terms of, for the Laurels, and especially for me personally, this is absolutely an issue of reenactment versus recreation. The bar for recreating a person of color or a culture that is not mine intrinsically is much, much higher than if I was just doing some loudmouth French lawyer. When approaching this exercise, there's simply no room for recreation. It has to be reenacted, and it requires the utmost it means talking to community leaders in those other cultures. It means constantly checking to make sure that your biases aren't slipping in without you even knowing it. You have to reenact it. And so with that, you must place your emphasis on accuracy, humility, first and foremost, respect and admiration for that culture. One must steadfastly avoid any appearance of mockery, ridicule, or degradation. The Order is also exploring options into sensitivity classes to help with our understanding of this. It's important to remember that there's no instruction manual for this. There are things that are written down about, hey, here's a good look at reenactment versus, pardon me, appreciation versus appropriation. But even within one community, we can have one person from that community say one thing about their culture and have someone from the same community say something completely different. So it's also really important to remember that persons of color don't have, just because they're persons of color or come from one culture, don't have a shared experience that is universal all the time. So it's really, really important to be open to education. Having said that, we're all learning. It can be a complex issue. If you see someone, as Mistress Katerina said, if you see someone representing a culture that is not their own and making some fairly egregious mistakes, however consciously or unconsciously, please feel free to speak up and educate that person. And as reenactors, it is essential for us to be open to that feedback. It can take a lot for someone who has been conditioned to not speak out or thinks, oh, well, you know, they're not going to listen to me. Listen to what they're saying. Listen with humility and listen with that level of appreciation for the culture, but also be prepared to educate us when we have goofed up.
Thank you. Very good points. This is a very short question, but wow. What does racism look like? And that will, the first person to answer that will be Francesco. What does racism look like?
I unmuted. Okay, can everyone hear me? All right. So first of all, I'm a white girl, so take my answer with all of the caveats that me being a white girl comes with answering a question like, what does racism look like? So I reached out to some external non-SCA resources to come up with some answers for this one,
See what
because
you're saying.
this is an issue that I've been working on in some of my other online communities that I'm involved in right now as well. So of course, it's easy for us to say things like, yes, it's racist to wear swastikas on your trim. And yes, it's racist to call people by insulting racist slurs, things like that. That's very easy to point out. It's also not all that obvious, but one of the other things that that is racist is these things called microaggressions, and that also goes for other types of ists as well, like it's homophobic and it's misogynist to use microaggressions. And I thought I was going to research a little bit better about how to describe what a microaggression is, and then I didn't. But microaggressions on a racist front would be things like, oh, you're so smart for a X type of person, or oh, you're so well educated, or you're so eloquent, you're so well spoken. So things that kind of imply that you, the speaker, as a white person, presumably are impressed with how well this person is doing, because you expect every member of their racial group to somehow be less than a white person. So don't do that. I can look into maybe doing an entire class. Like, I could probably speak for an hour on don't be racist. So maybe that's a thing I can do a class on. But another thing that we've seen with all of the recent Black Lives Matter type movements is that our entire society is racist. All of North American society is racist, and probably all of British society too, but we're not talking about that right now. Everything is structured on a racist basis. So power structures are based on a racist basis. And within the SCA, we don't need to deal with that, but we do need to think about ways that the SCA is structured to be racist. And one of the ways that it is of course, that when we started out, we were based on just a European model. And at that point, we said, well, you have to have been in contact with Europe to be portraying a persona. And we've expanded that. Now we say you can portray any kind of a culture. But what can we as Laurels do to sort of break down that Eurocentrism? So one of the things that we can do, and of course we'll start thinking about other things that we can do, is we can start thinking about other ways that we can look at how people are documenting their work, and we can encourage people to look at types of arts and sciences that they can do that are not Eurocentric. So we often have placed a heavy emphasis on the past on written documentation from written sources. And I think that many people find that when they start researching things from places other than Western Europe, they start to find that there isn't written sources, that they have to rely on the oral tradition. So as Laurels, we need to start thinking about other ways that we can ask people to document their sources and think outside the box in terms of what types of evidence we can let people use when they're documenting their sources. So we've had several different kinds of people documenting their own cultures through the oral tradition, and we need to encourage that kind of thing when people are researching.
Thank you. Philippe.
Okay, so I'm hopefully going to be able to expand on what Maestro Francesco said, in the sense of being able to amplify a little bit about what microaggressions are. And I'll begin by saying that discrimination in any form, not just racism, but racism, misogyny, bigotry, homophobia, all that, it looks and sounds like many things. It isn't just using the N word or the F word or anything like that. And by F, I mean fag. So as a member of the Enchanted People myself, I've experienced homophobia both in and outside of the SCA. It's been a really long time since I've had to deal with name calling, but I have had people come right out and say things like, oh, I think a baronial couple should be a man and a woman, or because I prefer to enact male personas, my wife was asked when my gender reassignment surgery was scheduled for. These sorts of things, they can come across as, well, one of them is just blatant homophobia. Microaggressions tend to kind of come out occasionally from people who are seeking information. They just want to ask you a question. They're curious, and so they come out with questions like, hey, so who's the man in your relationship? Or who leads when you dance? And I'm afraid, well, some people from my community may find that the education of those asking is part of their calling or their vocation. I don't feel that. The internet's out there, people, look that stuff up. In the age of information, ignorance is a choice. And I'm sorry, but that's just true. And a lot of these interactions are offensive, regardless of where you're coming from in your heart. You might not mean to be offensive, you're being offensive anyway. And the most important thing about these forms of discrimination, and I'm not just limiting this to homophobia, it's just the one I can speak to the most eloquently, perhaps. You call it out. If you see it, make that person uncomfortable. We no longer live in a world where we have to make people who make us uncomfortable comfortable just because they have the right of free speech. If you're not willing or able to, if you're not comfortable calling out somebody for using those words or making those jokes or using that accent in a very demeaning, ridiculous way, please find somebody who will do it on your behalf. We need to start nailing this issue every single time it comes up, because every time you're silent, that's consent. So that's what racism looks, sounds, and feels like, and it's got to stop.
Fully agree. It has to stop. Oh, I needed to take a breath after that. Thank you very much. How does the order assess neurodivergence issues in candidates when it comes to written documentation or PLQs, peer-like qualities? Katerina?
Hi. So, first off, the reason that the Laurels ask for written documentation is that it's the easiest way for us to see the demonstration of knowledge. It's the easiest. It's not the only way you can demonstrate your knowledge. And there's a lot of options that you have and that we have currently that in the past weren't as available. So there's audio recordings, video recordings, things like speech to text and text to speech. If you have to produce documentation for a competition, you're more than welcome to use a typist or an editor, use point form. These are all accommodations that can be made, but we need to know the people who are organizing a competition, the people that are organizing the judging of the competition, and we need to know in advance. As far as the Laurels go, we aren't the organizers of the competitions. We're just often the judges. But if you're having problems going to one of the judges, please come to us, or one of the judges or an organizer. Come to us in advance so that we can make sure that you have the ability to do this sort of stuff. I personally am dyslexic, so I know you can become a Laurel without having the skills necessarily to do the writing yourself to the same extent as somebody who might have better skills in that area. We will help, and there's a lot of us who are neurodivergent on the council.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next up, Maitre Philippe.
So the short answer to this question is the word assess comes up in the question. So the short answer to that is we don't assess any level of neurodiversity. We simply don't have the skills. I don't believe any of us even have those skills in our mundane lives. So therefore, we rely on you, if you exhibit neurodiversity, to tell us, because if that's a concern. It is not and should not be an obstacle to participation in the arts and sciences. Mistress Katerina mentioned a number of various options available to you if writing is not your bag. And I'll be the first one to say, when you can submit verbal documentation and blah, 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 blah. The first time that came out, I was like, what? You can't even write a paper? That was my white privilege. And here's the value in people calling you out on that stuff. I needed it explained to me. And now, please, please, if you can't write a university or scholarly paper, or if you have difficulties in any way doing that stuff, do it anyway. Like enter that competition, make that thing, contribute, because your contribution is valid. We would rather have you contribute in your way. We'll make the allowances, that we would rather have you do it than not do it at all. And as Mistress Katerina also said, we're here to help you. I've been copy editor for papers and coaches for people who want to submit things at an arts and sciences competition, or even just helping to find resources to research. We're always willing to help. Please just come see one of us. And as for the PLQs, well, everybody poops the sheets once in a while. No one's perfect. And it's really important to remember that persons that are neurodiverse, although, I mean, it might be a certain level of discrimination, but persons with neurodiversity don't poop the sheets any more often than anybody else. So we're not looking at you that way or looking at anyone that way. The important thing is that if someone comes to you about a PLQ issue, again, cannot stress this enough, please call it out. Please bring it to someone's attention. It is difficult, and if someone comes to you and says, excuse me, but this thing that you said, or this thing that you've done, or I feel this way, listen with humility. Remember how much courage it takes to approach someone to say, you know, you did this thing, or this is going on. Of course, the first reaction is to be defensive, but don't be. Open your heart and your ears, and we can initiate a dialogue that will serve us both.
Well said. Thank you. Next question. How is the order accountable for their members' behavior, especially regarding candidate discussions and accountability to truthful representation? Katerina?
Hi. So first off, the Laurels aren't a policing body. And when we are talking about representation in council, we are all professionals, and that is essentially part of being a peer. And we need to trust the Laurels that bring this information forward. We each have a say that advises the Crown, but ultimately who becomes a Laurel is up to the Crown. And it's their decision to make those calls. And they can actually talk to anyone, not just a peer, if they're thinking of making somebody a Laurel or a Knight or any of the other peerages. And so in that respect, we do try to keep everything accountable, and we will talk to people about their behavior. The other thing that happens within a council is that people will recuse themselves if they feel they're biased. So as far as that going on, we try to make sure that we keep everything targeted when we're discussing somebody's progress. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Dorothy.
Yes, this question really spoke to me because this was something I wondered about as an SCA newcomer. When I was getting active in a barony where there were not many members of the order playing, and before Avacal became a kingdom, when I was part of a vast kingdom, much farther geographically than I could travel myself, I wondered, how do the Laurels, first of Antir and then of Avacal, how do they even see what we are doing out here in Mergenwood? And what I have discovered since joining the council is the great lengths to which so many of my fellow Laurels go to learn more about candidates and to do everything they can to get a full picture to bring to the council. During our council meetings at Kingdom events, we usually only have an hour or even half an hour to discuss candidates, and so we do stay very focused on a few important points of discussion. But as far as the truthful representation of the artists, artisans, and scientists of Avacal as a whole, the modern technology, again, is giving us a lot of opportunities. Every time I see somebody sharing their work or highlighting a friend's work on the Avacal Arts and Science page, my heart sings. Because even, 10 years ago, starting out in the SCA, I didn't have that same access. The Facebook community was not as vibrant. I was not as technologically savvy, and I didn't have that ability to say, hey, look what we're doing here. Look at this class, this is wonderful. And so for me, the ability to do that ongoing exploration of everyone's research and passions through the online community, and then the ability of the council to discuss it online and not need to fit it all into 1 hour at a very crowded tournament event, has been invaluable in enabling all of us to have greater access to the truthful, complete representation of all of the candidates and of all of the people who make our arts and science community in Avacal so vibrant and rich.
Thank you. When you know one of your members has a demonstrated vendetta against a candidate, how do you manage that kind of dynamic? First up will be Francesco.
So, hi. A lot of this is going to be more or less the same answer that Katerina gave in the last question. But so first of all, it's difficult for just one person to sway the council one way or the other, because in the end, we're only advising the crown. So it's up to the crown to make the decision, and everybody has their say on the council. And at the last several meetings that I've been at in person, the person running the meeting, who is one of the royals usually, will either go around the table and make sure that every single person speaks, to make sure that every voice is heard, or if they've heard several opinions on one side to a candidate, like several people have said very good things about a candidate, then the person running the meeting will say, well, does anyone have any differing opinions that they'd like to say? Or if several people have said a bad thing about the candidate, then they'll say the same thing. Does anyone have something different to say about the candidate? Just to make sure that they're hearing all opinions about the candidate. And if there's one person who's notably always against a particular candidate, then it would be up to the rest of the Laurels, I guess, to to call that person out and say, like, why are you still so set against this candidate? It's been this was a sort of a hypothetical example that we discussed, but it's been 20 years and you're still against this candidate. What has this person, why are you still against this person? Please give us concrete examples. And then, if depending on what that person says, hopefully the Crown would either decide that that person really did have a good point, or would decide that whatever else the rest of the council had to say outweighed this one person's particular vendetta, we could call it. Or, like Katerina said, if there's a person who knows that they have a bias against a particular candidate, or who knows that they're biased in some fashion or has a conflict of interest, then they can voluntarily restrict themselves from voting on that candidate. And that has happened while I've been on the council. We've had people say, I'm not going to vote on this candidate one way or the other.
Thank you. Dorothy.
Just expounding a little more upon Francesco's final point there, that business of recusing yourself or stepping back from a discussion because you are too close personally to the candidate, whether that is in a negative way or in a positive way, is both a very important self-inventory. You know, oh, I shouldn't really be voting on this candidate because they are my best friend. I shouldn't vote on my spouse, so I'm going to step out of the room while this person is discussed. Or so-and-so and I have an interpersonal wound that would make me less likely to be fair and impartial. Those are all really important self-inventories, but it also provides the opening to the conversation. If we felt that someone who should be stepping aside was not, other members of the council can say, well, I know that you and so-and-so have a lot of issues with X. Do you think perhaps it would be appropriate for you to step back from this vote, or provide a more balanced hearing of the candidate by stepping back from the discussion? And one of the things that I have, again, discovered since being on the council is that although we are so many diverse and different and unique perspectives, we are all committed to trying to serve the council and serve the kingdom as best we can. And I have been very inspired the last few reigns by the fact that our royalty has been very active in making sure all of the voices are heard in the peerage, as Katerina said, or Francesco said, going around the table and making sure everyone has a voice, making sure that the balanced conversations are happening even within the very limited time, is something I have seen the Crowns proactively take on. And it's a great exemplar of true leadership, from which I think all of us on the Council of Laurels can and have learned. And I hope to see those practices continuing going forward.
Thank you. Next question. When you know one of your I'm sorry, I've done that again. If there is a demonstrated pattern of apprentice-student bullying such that some even leave the society citing the bullying, does the order ever intervene on the apprentice or student's behalf? And the first answer to that would be Sal.
Hi. Can you hear me? Okay. We can try to be a social influencer with that peer, but I want to emphasize, we do not have the ability to act as a policing authority, nor are we encouraged to do so. We will assist you, the individual, with addressing your concerns throughout the proper channels. We will stand with you during the entire process. That being said, bullying, discrimination or any other abusive behavior has no place in our SCA. If abusive behavior is exhibited by a person in the SCA, whether you're a peer or not, this must be taken seriously, and I was assured that it will be. You can be assured it will be. Mental abuse and shaming are examples of harassment. Harassment can be addressed with the grievance procedure as a place to start. It must be realized that harassment can be defined as a crime and may be treated as such. We do want to recognize that the system has failed in the past and that we are currently reviewing and modifying that grievance procedure so it won't fail in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Katerina.
So, generally speaking, what Sav said, apart from that, if it's not as severe bullying, one of the things that we do with our apprentices, if they are dealing with either being bullied or if they have an accusation of bullying against them, we help if they ask us. Again, they're adults and they do have to be willing to ask for help. We will occasionally advise people that, and we'll give them the ability to help them with writing things, making sure their tone is correct. But at the end of the day, if we are talking severe bullying, this goes through the grievance procedure. It's not a Laurels council thing. And when it comes to a student Laurel mentorship, that will depend on the state of the mentorship between the Laurel and student. Often there has been cases where that's where the problem comes in. And we do try to help as best as we can when we can. But yeah, we will sit with them, we will mediate, we'll try to work on the problem so that it doesn't become a problem that has to go to a grievance procedure.
Thank you. There seems to be a lot of animosity, infighting, and a lack of respect amongst the Laurels. As leaders and mentors in our community, what steps are you taking to improve communication, mutual respect, and challenge internal biases? Sav?
Yes. Let me say the Laurels Council is full of passionate people. And sometimes our discussions become heated. Sometimes this spills out of our meetings. We also recognize that the populace has overheard peers venting about other peers. We are human, we are not perfect. What we are doing is we are working on trying to be more courteous and respectful to each other, both in and out of our meetings.
Thank you. Philippe.
And this is not a criticism of Viscountess Sav. It is not an attempt to deflect the question of responsibility about the animosity, about the infighting, about the lack of respect. If I'm to be perfectly honest, these things do exist in the Laurels Council. I suspect that they exist on every council up to a certain point. The problem that the Laurels have exhibited, unfortunately, is a lack of professionalism in doing it where the populace can hear us. Venting is perfectly normal. Venting is perfectly necessary, in fact, but it shouldn't be done where all y'all can hear us doing it. Conflicts do occur, and because we're a group of passionate, intelligent, assertive people, our disagreements tend to be perhaps a little more obvious, a little louder maybe, but that doesn't excuse us from that very poor behavior. And I know I've been guilty. I would like to take this opportunity to personally apologize to each and every member of the populace of Avacal who has overheard me slamming one of my noble colleagues, or anyone else for that matter. I understand that that behavior is disappointing. It's not peer-like, and it has really disappointed many people in Avacal. A lot of these questions have been very eye-opening in terms of how we're perceived by the populace. And I personally am, one, honored to be able to address these issues, and two, I apologize. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Very heavy subjects coming up and questions. Why do the other peers come across as human and the Laurels come across as the chosen ones? Francesco, yes, you get to go first.
That was me making the like, oh, chosen one face. When we were workshopping these questions, we had a lot of discussion about this question because we weren't actually sure what it meant. So I'm gonna try and give snippets of 3 different answers here. So the first one, to echo what Philippe just said, is that yes, sometimes we can all be assholes, and we apologize. So then the other parts were, some people thought that this meant, why are all of the Laurels cool kids, and why are they all friends with each other? And the answer to that is that it's because we're all nerds, and we all like to talk about that cool new thing that was dug up in Siberia. And we all know that if we go to talk to each other about that cool new thing that was dug up in Siberia, and here's how I think I'm going to recreate it, that we will find a willing audience to discuss how we're going to do it, and that Sue will know exactly what seeds I need to grow the thing, and Dorothy will probably know what kind of fabric and dye I should use, and Philippe will have an idea of how I can build a persona to go with this cool new find. And so that's why we're all friends, because we like the same things and we like to nerd out about the same things. And if it's about why we seem unapproachable at events, then I have an answer for that too. And that one's a bit less fun, but I personally have found, since I became a peer, that I have a lot less time to myself at events, and I'm not even really sure that I could tell you where my time goes at events, because there are only peer councils at the major Crown events. So what am I doing the rest of the time at the other events? I'm not even sure. But I spend a lot more time helping out the Crowns than I used to, and I spend a lot more time judging arts and sciences competitions than I used to, and I just am suddenly drawn in many more directions than I used to be. So if you see Laurel being very busy at events, that's true, probably. So if we seem like we don't have as much time to stop and speak to you about your cool thing, unfortunately, that's probably true, but we really do want to talk to you about your cool thing. So please friend us on Facebook, because we would love to speak to you offline when we have much more time to correspond with you and look at pictures of your thing. If we come across as jerks at events, maybe it's because we are being jerks. We apologize for that. We are real people, just like you. If we're letting you down in the peer-like quality department because we're venting about other members of our council, we apologize for that too.
Thank you. Busy at events? No way. Can't believe that. Never. Katerina.
So Francesca said pretty much everything that needs to be said there. I will also add, though, that arts is a solo activity. So service really isn't, when you're fighting against another person. when you're doing your artwork, that's a solo thing. When you're researching, that's a solo thing. We spend a lot of time alone. We spend a lot of time focused on what we do, and that makes us not as practiced with our people skills. And so this lack of practice often leads to seeming standoffish. There's a lot of us who are shy or have various quirks that we don't interact as well as we could with people. And of course, for that, we're sorry. The thing is that we try, and we very much, I personally like, because I have a slightly more education background, I do like having new people come up and talk to me. And I know a lot of the other Laurels do. If you've got a question, you don't need to be in a mentor relationship. You do not need to be a student or an apprentice or someone special to just come up and talk to me. I personally will never pick apart a newbie's costume because I'm probably wearing running shoes. So, yeah, hopefully that helps you guys feel a little bit more comfortable coming forward. And yeah, we're just usually looking for people who share our geeks. And as soon as you start talking to us about our geek, we might not ever shut up. And of course, you'll be welcome in because we'll be sitting there talking to you for days about our geek. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. Yeah, I like this Zoom stuff because, yeah, nothing on there down. Don't do it. A lot of questions came in around the mean girl reputation and gatekeeping. How does the Order of the Laurel plan on addressing these perceptions? Do the Laurels place more emphasis on PLQs than ANS mastery, especially when so many appear to lack in their own PLQs? Sav?
Okay. So I just want to say we acknowledge that there have been issues in the Laurels Council, as Francesco and Philippe and Katerina have all, and everybody has already acknowledged. I know that at times we have all acted unpeer-like. It is hoped that after somebody is elevated that we continue to work and improve both in our PLQs and artistic abilities. Sometimes that doesn't happen. And I want to apologize if we have disappointed anybody in Avacal for any of that. We are human and we do make mistakes. And please don't hold the whole council responsible for those who have displayed a lack of PLQs, because it should not be reflective of the entire order. That being said, let's move to your other parts of the questions. Moving forward, we as a group have discussed and will try moving forward to conduct ourselves with more courtesy and more chivalric conduct, as asked of us when we became peers. With regard to the part of the question to gatekeeping, the Laurels Council is an advisory body for the Crown. As you heard before, Laurels have recused themselves or have been asked to do so during discussions of candidates. If the council or a majority of the council feels that a candidate is not ready for elevation, they would just simply say not ready to the Crown. Sometimes the candidate's peer feels they're not ready and would say not ready to the Crown. This can be perceived as gatekeeping, but you need to know that the Crown has the final decision on whether making a peer or not. Now, with regard to PLQs having more emphasis over skill, I'm just going to read you a little portion of the governing from the governing documents of the SCA for entry into the Order of Laurel. They state the candidate may have attained, or excuse me, the candidate must have attained the standard of excellence in skill and or knowledge equal to that of their prospective peers in some area of the arts and sciences. So we actually don't put more emphasis on PLQs, but in a lot of cases, that's the most visible aspect people can see. And often, not always, but often that's the last hurdle the candidates fine tune before they are put on vigil and elevated.
Thank you. Philippe?
So I'm going to follow Mistress Sav's lead and address the various portions of that question in parts. So with regard to gatekeeping, I'm just going to quote what His Royal Highness Vic said in our large group meeting when we were discussing these questions. I agree with him fully when he says it's really important to remember that gatekeeping only happens when a group feels that a candidate is not ready, and that in itself is not actually gatekeeping. Corpora very clearly provides the peerages with outlines for what is required in terms of standards, again, as Mistress Sav says. This is regarding all aspects of the peerage from artistic mastery to PLQs. We do not place more emphasis on PLQs than artistic mastery, but as said previously, PLQs can and have held people back. But again, important to remember, we are merely an advisory committee, if you will, and it is the Crown's final decision. Also previously stated, it's really hard for one person to hold back that entire very opinionated council. So the order acknowledges that there are some members who have transgressed, that some of our PLQs have not been perhaps what we would prefer over the last little while. We are involved in ongoing discussions and the process of adjusting these issues. Clearly, these discussions are not going to be public. That leads to shaming, humiliation. No one wants to see that, really. And again, if you are, or if you see behavior by a Laurel that you find offensive, call it out. The grievance procedure is there for you. Contact the Kingdom Seneschal. And sorry again.
Thank you. So we do have a follow-up question as well. And this will be our last question. How bad of behavior does a Laurel need to exhibit before their peerage is taken away from them? Are they spoken to about their behavior? And how would a member of the populace go about reporting said person? Do you think it would be taken seriously? First up will be Soph.
So, I will repeat, only the board of directors has the authority to decide what level of poor behavior is required for a peer to lose their peerage. We're not the policing authority. I'm talking the Laurels Council, and we do not have the authority to act as such. Bad behavior needs to be reported, and you can do that through the grievance procedure, which you can find in Avacal Kingdom Law. We will take you seriously. We will assist you with addressing your concerns through the proper channels, and we will stand with you during the entire process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And for the last word, Philippe.
First of all, I want to say I can't tell you how much I personally appreciate having the last word here. I will not amplify what Mr. Sav has just said, but I can reassure you that a Laurel who steps out and poops the sheets is definitely spoken to, but that is a matter between them and the Crown. the bot is beginning to address sanctions, but in these early stages, it's difficult to tell right now if there's any consistent guidelines for what behaviors result in sanctions, i.e. the revocation of a peerage. It's difficult to find out if there's any consistency there. We're still in early days. If a member of the populace has witnessed concerning behavior from a laurel, yes, we will take that very seriously. We would hope that the person would follow the grievance procedure, and in cases of repeated offenses, the harassment and bullying policy is also in place. Now, bear in mind that concerns that involve the mundane authorities must be taken to the mundane authorities. If we're talking about illegal issues have arisen, you have to contact the police. We don't have a mandate for that at all. Now, the other thing that I want to, so the bullying and harassment policy, the grievance procedure has been mentioned many times during this entire Q&A. But we've received feedback that indicate that maybe that procedure is a little bit unwieldy, it's a little intimidating, it's a little difficult to navigate. Personally, I will be initiating a conversation with my noble colleagues in the Order of the Laureate to, for a couple of us, both peers and non-peers, to educate ourselves on the grievance procedure, on the harassment and bullying policy, so that if you feel that you need or would like to pursue an action in that direction, one of us will act as your advocates. I don't mean your defense lawyer, but I do mean somebody who is conversant with these policies in order to help you navigate through it, because it seems like an awful lot. And you may also need emotional and so just some kind of support. And as Mistress Saab says, we are here. We will help you. If you don't, there may be laurels you don't trust, but please find one of us. We come to you with open hearts. After this conversation especially, we would really like to hear from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's all for our questions. I would like to thank all the panelists. It's not often that I get to sit with such esteemed laurels and ask them all sorts of very, very hard questions, and I appreciate your answers. I appreciate your candor and your honesty, and I appreciate the work that you do for our community. Thank you again for allowing me to moderate. I did learn more than I thought I was going to learn. I appreciate that very much, and I hope everybody else gets out of it what they need to. And you know, I think Mistress Adelheid, Meisterin Adelheid, pardon me, will speak to this as well. But this isn't the end. This is the beginning, and we know we have a ways to go. And I'm stealing some of Adelheid's thunder, so I'll let her have it. Thank you all again for your time, and have a good night, Avacal.
Thank you very much, everyone. Many of the questions that came to us from the populace had to do with issues surrounding bullying, and it's clear that many of you are angry. We've been called gatekeepers, mean girls, and chosen ones. These things are painful to hear, but there were enough of those types of questions that they became impossible to ignore, and we want you to know that we heard you. The Laurels, as Laurels, we are in service to the Crown, the ideals of our society, and the populace of this kingdom. Their Royal Majesties cannot be everywhere and therefore must rely on recommendations from the populace. We too need your help to remind us when we stumble in our responsibilities. We acknowledge that we have let you down. We have behaved badly, and we as individuals and as an order apologize. We are sorry that our actions damaged the trust between us. We are sorry that you've been unnecessarily exposed to our internal conflicts, which we must also acknowledge. Hopefully going forward, you'll notice an increased effort on behalf of the Laurels to reach out and work with individuals to earn your trust and respect once more. We will do our best to listen more and listen harder. We will endeavor to be leaders and not bullies. To that end, we wish to be held accountable for our actions. If you have witnessed behavior from a Laurel of Avacal that you find unacceptable, speak to a Laurel you trust, or speak to someone that you trust to approach us on your behalf. We renew our commitment to you, the populace, and to the Crown of Avacal to do better. That ends our Q&A, and thank you again to our panelist and moderator for volunteering your time to this series. Thank you as well to the Order of Chivalry for starting this series off, and thank you to the Order of Laurel who supported this panel with your thoughtful self-reflection, honesty, and honesty in providing your feelings on these questions. And finally, thank you to the populace of Avacal. The pain and honesty in some of these questions is apparent, and thank you for putting them out there for us. I want to say the Order of the Pelican has opened up their question period and will be open until Wednesday. And tune in next week for their panel to have your questions answered. Good night, Avacal, and we look forward to seeing you all on the other side of this pandemic.